Hello everybody, welcome to Brown Eyed Billy Girl. My name is Alexis and this is my brand new channel. This will actually be the first video on the channel ever, so welcome in. If you're like me, you've probably clicked on this video because maybe you can relate a little bit. As you can tell by the title, I've gone through a miscarriage. I've decided to make this channel and these videos because I've just kind of started my fertility journey, but already I feel like what I'm going through isn't like the typical, most talked about kind of experience. Although I feel like there's information out there on fertility and miscarriages and other things like that, I think the more information the better. And if I can put out these videos, maybe like one woman or whoever out there can relate or maybe like learn something from it, I think that would be really valuable. I've gone through some stuff already, but I think it makes the most sense to start off all these videos with my miscarriage story. So just a little bit of background on me. I was on the birth control pill for 11 years, went off the pill and immediately started trying. Had one period, it was like pretty normal for the most part. Then on the second month is when I got pregnant. Little funny kind of side note now. By the way, if you all want me to talk more about this in a later video, I totally will. I don't know how helpful this is, but here we go. The day before I found out I was pregnant, I actually thought I got my period. I had bled enough for most of the day that I thought, for sure, this is definitely a period. I'm not pregnant. And then later on that day, I noticed like the bleeding kind of tapered off, which I thought was unusual. At least for me, that was unusual. The next day, I woke up with some very strange symptoms. Like I felt like I could smell everything. And I have a pretty good sense of smell, but this was like, I walked into the kitchen and I thought I could smell the inside of the microwave while the door was closed. It was super bizarre. And then there was like no more bleeding. And I thought, oh, like, what if I didn't get my period? So anyways, took a test and in like a minute, it read positive. I was like, oh my gosh, that first feeling of like seeing a positive test for the first time. I'm like excited, but I know in like the back of my mind, like miscarriage is a possibility. So I was going to be positive about this, but also a little bit realistic because I know how these things go. Other than a strong sense of smell, some other symptoms I had really early on were things like cramping, not like your typical kind of like period cramps. Like I feel like period cramps, at least for me, are usually very like a gnawing kind of all over feeling. This was like a lower like stretching feeling and it was like very intense. I think I would say it's actually like it was a little bit worse than period cramps if I had to compare the two. Other symptoms I had were a little bit of chest soreness. I didn't get the super duper sore boobs like other women have described. Definitely some bloating for sure. I felt like my stomach was so much bigger than it actually was just from the bloating alone. And then some not so great symptoms would be like I had really bad headaches in the beginning, constipation, which is super fun, acne, and you probably can't tell because I'm wearing a butt ton of makeup, but acne has definitely been like a lasting symptom. And then fatigue. I slept like 12 hours for a couple of days in a row, which was like really strange and unusual for me. And I felt like I could still keep sleeping even after those 12 hours. Like I was still somehow tired. During this whole time though, my appointment was scheduled for the 8-week mark. And before then, I never had any bleeding outside of the original bleeding from what I thought was a period. Like after that, no bleeding at all. No indication that anything was like wrong. So in my mind, I thought, okay, like we've made it almost the first appointment. There's been no bleeding. So everything must be good, right? I also took a second test 5 days later after the first one, just because I had the test and I was curious. And it was also definitely like very positive. So the first appointment was at our 8-week point. It was 2 days before Christmas. So it was December of last year of 2022. I'm making this video right now. It's March of 2023. We go in for the appointment and the doctor does, like they do a bunch of blood work and an HCG blood work test. And then comes the ultrasound. And I remember the doctor looking for like a while. And in my mind, I know, okay, 6 weeks, you should be able to hear a heartbeat. I didn't hear anything. Plus, he was also looking for like a long time. And then finally, he says out loud, like, I'm not very sure. Or he said something along the lines of that, like, I'm not very sure about this. He pointed out what he suspected was the baby and measured it and said the baby was only measuring about 5 weeks and 5 days long. And I had been tracking this stuff like religiously. Like I tracked when my period was, I tracked the days I ovulated, like I took a bunch of those tests, LH strip tests. So there was no confusion for me on like when I conceived. Like I at least knew like right around like a 4-day mark of when I would have conceived. So the fact that he was saying that the baby was 5 weeks and 5 days along when I thought it was 8 weeks really didn't make any sense to me. After the ultrasound, I got dressed and we went into his office and asked, what do you think is the chance of this baby surviving? And he literally said out loud, I would give it about 50-50. Leaving that appointment was very shitty. I definitely did not have much hope or optimism that this was going to work out. It just, everything kind of changed. Like, yeah. So a couple of days later, they have you come back for a second HCG blood test. I'll put those numbers up. What the first one was, I think it was like 129,000 units of HCG. And then the second one was 166. And although it was going up, which was also a confusing part of this whole thing, not only was there no bleeding or no sign that anything was wrong, but HCG was still going up. And even though it wasn't doubling by like every 48 hours or whatever it's supposed to be, it was still going up. So in my mind, I still had like a little bit of hope. Although the nurse, when she called me to tell me my second HCG reading, she didn't sound like very hopeful. She sounded more confused, if anything. So the second appointment, which would have been at the 9-week mark now, we go in. And once again, the doctor does an ultrasound, and it's taking a little while. There's obviously no heartbeat because I don't hear anything. And then he just says out loud to us, like, yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I don't think this is a viable pregnancy. I like tried to really keep it together. I think I shed like a couple of tears, but for the most part, I did okay. So when he broke that news to us, he then went on to say what we could do next. And mind you, this is like 2 days before New Year's Eve. I originally had, I thought the first appointment was going to go well. So in my mind, this is like our first pregnancy. I'm going to tell my family on Christmas Day. Wouldn't that be just so great? We had like a whole thing planned. I bought a little baby shirt and a bunch of stuff. That would have been nice. But anyway, so he goes on to say, I know that there's in a scenario where it's a miscarriage where you don't know anything's going on, and then you find out at the office. They usually give you 3 choices. It's usually you wait it out, you can take a pill, or you can opt for surgery. And although I knew that stuff online, the 2 that he really focused on were either just waiting it out and seeing if it happens on its own, or getting some sort of surgery done. And at the time, I was leaving for a vacation in a week with a bunch of friends, and plus it was like 2 days before New Year's Eve, and not the greatest time to try to schedule surgery. So I just said I would wait on it for now and then decide later. We would see. Something I also want to mention about the doctor is when talking about the surgery, he said, if you were my daughter or my wife or a loved one of mine, he's like, I would recommend you get the surgery done. Basically, I think because he wouldn't want the person that he knew to just wait it out and go through it naturally. So I thought that perspective was really interesting, and it was kind of kind for him to say that, because everything he had been saying up until then was very like robotic and medical. And that was like one thing that really resonated with me, that he said, like, if you were somebody of my family, I would recommend this surgery. We actually ended up scheduling a 3rd ultrasound, which never happened because I don't know why. I guess in my mind and my husband's mind, we thought like, well, maybe there's a chance that they're wrong. So we wanted to feel like we did something at that appointment and accomplished something. So we scheduled a 3rd ultrasound, but eventually ended up canceling them. I guess that's not important. So during this time period, it's now the beginning of 2023. I'm definitely like wrestling with what to do. I think in total, it was about 3 weeks that went by from the second appointment to me eventually opting for surgery. And in between that time, there was no bleeding, like no nothing. And with the HCG levels being so high, I began to think like, what if this doesn't happen for like a long time? I had read online that some women wait several weeks for a miscarriage to happen on its own, and I didn't want to do that. While I was on vacation with my friends and me and my husband, we had our own room. I talked to him one day, basically said like, I think I want to get the surgery. I don't want to wait anymore. This sucks. Feel like I have no control over my body. I'm waiting for something to happen. It could happen at like a horrible time. What if it happened on vacation or I was out with friends? What if it happened literally anywhere in public? It would have been very difficult. So I opted for the surgery. I'm going to make a video about my D&E later. And once I do, the link will be right here. If it's currently blank, I'm sorry, it means I haven't made the video yet. But I will, because I think that information is really important and not as out there. So that's pretty much the entire miscarriage story. I didn't want to go into too many details about like the emotional roller coaster that went with it, just because I wasn't trying to get sad and crying in my very first video on this channel. But looking back on the whole thing, I would definitely say the only thing I might have done a little differently would have been to tell my friends and family sooner. The only reason I told them when I did, which I told them like 2 days before I had the surgery, was because I jokingly said to myself, like, wait a minute, don't people sometimes die when they get surgery done? Like, maybe I should tell my family what's going on. I definitely could have confided in them earlier, but it was just a lot to think about. And I think I had truly hoped and thought that it would have happened on its own, and it didn't. And 3 weeks of just waiting and walking around with what used to be a baby inside you is like one of the most darkest and ugliest feelings I've ever had, like, in my life. I just want to say, for anybody who's watching this video who has either gone through something similar or maybe is going through something right now, or whatever it is, whatever led you to click on this video, I'm really sorry for any loss that you've had or multiple losses. Like, this sucks. I'm glad to be putting my story out there in the hopes that somebody out there can relate and maybe it helps you in some way. But it's kind of shit that we even need to do this and talk about this. It's shit that this is a thing. I think the worst part about it is it literally affects 1 in 4 women, but we don't talk about it much as a society. I can make a whole video on that topic in itself, but I won't. Unless you guys want me to, let me know. We can rant a little bit. But yeah, that's basically my miscarriage story. It's been 2 months since the surgery, so I'm trying again. And there's other things I'm doing right now and I have been through that I'm going to be making more videos on in the future. If you want to share your story with me in the comments, if you feel comfortable doing that, feel free. Or anything you want to say at all, that would be really cool. If this video resonated with you in any way, please give it a like. I don't know how to end this video, so I'm just gonna cover the screen and say goodbye. Bye! Great start.